Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps more than you know. A lot of you have told me you watch these videos late at night. So before you settle in, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. This is a long one. Get comfortable and let's begin. The morning of October 24th, 2023 began like any other for Peter Davies. Earl Grey tea at precisely 7:15 a.m. The same navy silk tie he'd worn every Tuesday for the past 3 years. His worn leather briefcase, faithful companion to a man whose life revolved around predictability. By 6:30 that evening, Peter Davies had vanished without a trace. This isn't just another missing person case. This is the story of how one accountant's obsession with accuracy uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of London's financial elite. A conspiracy worth killing for. Because when the final numbers were tallied, Peter Davies discovered that someone at his prestigious firm was stealing millions, and that someone would do anything to keep him quiet. What Peter didn't know was that his colleague had been watching his every move, planning the perfect murder disguised as a disappearance. But even the most careful killers make mistakes, and Peter Davies was about to become both a victim and key to his own justice. To understand what happened to Peter Davies, you need to understand the man himself. Born March 2nd, 1988, in Manchester, Peter was the kind of child who organized his toys by size and color. His mother, Eleanor, a school secretary and devout Catholic, raised him alone after his father abandoned them when Peter was just 3 years old. Peter never got over his father leaving. Eleanor recalls, her voice breaking even now. He became obsessed with order, with making everything perfect. If he could control the numbers, maybe he could control everything else. That need for control led Peter to accounting. First-class honors at Manchester University, followed by steady promotions at increasingly prestigious London firms. By 2023, at age 35, he'd achieved his dream, senior financial analyst at Sterling and Finch Associates, one of London's most respected accounting firms. Peter's life was clockwork precision. Every morning, the same route to the Highbury and Islington tube station. Every evening, the same journey home to his modest Hampstead flat. Weekends were spent reading classic literature, Dickens, Hardy, Austen. Sunday evenings meant his ritual phone call to his mother at exactly 7 p.m. 13 years he lived in London, Eleanor says, and never once missed our Sunday call. Not once. His neighbors knew him as the polite man in flat 4B who always carried a book and never caused trouble. His colleagues respected his meticulous work, but rarely socialized with the quiet accountant who preferred spreadsheets to small talk. Peter Davies lived in the shadows by choice. But those shadows were about to become very dangerous. While Peter Davies cultivated invisibility, his colleague Kai Tanaka commanded attention. Late 30s, athletic build, designer suits that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Where Peter was self-effacing, Kai was magnetic. Where Peter was methodical, Kai was ruthlessly ambitious. Kai had arrived in London from Tokyo in his early 20s with nothing but brilliant credentials and burning ambition. Within 15 years, he built a reputation as Sterling and Finch's most aggressive dealmaker, the man you called when you needed results, not excuses. But ambition without boundaries is a dangerous thing. Kai was charming, absolutely charming. Remembers Margaret Sterling, the firm's senior partner. Clients loved him. He could close deals that other advisors couldn't even get meetings for. But there was something underneath that charm. Something calculated. That calculation was focused on one goal, making senior partner before his 40th birthday. There was just one problem standing in his way. Peter Davies. While Kai impressed clients with expensive dinners and flashy presentations, Peter quietly built a reputation for something more valuable, absolute integrity. When major clients needed forensic accounting work, they asked for Peter. When the firm's partners needed someone they could trust implicitly with their most sensitive files, they chose Peter. In September 2023, that trust would seal Peter's fate. The promotion Kai had been promised for 2 years went to Peter instead. Senior Manager, Financial Compliance Division. It was a stepping stone to partnership, and everyone knew it. Kai was furious, recalls Jennifer Walsh, a junior analyst who witnessed the announcement. He didn't show it, of course, just smiled and congratulated Peter. But his hands were shaking. I'd never seen Kai lose composure like that. What Jennifer didn't know was that Kai had more to worry about than wounded pride. Because Peter Davies' new role would give him access to every major account in the firm, including the accounts Kai had been systematically looting for the past 3 years. October 12, 2023. Peter Davies sat in his small office, surrounded by the kind of financial documents that would put most people to sleep. To Peter, they told stories of money flowing from accounts, through shell companies, into untraceable offshore havens. And one story in particular was keeping him awake at night. The Meridian Investment Portfolio, a collection of high-net-worth client accounts worth over £47 million, showed irregularities that set off every alarm bell in Peter's methodical mind. Unauthorized transfers, inflated fees, management charges that seemed to benefit companies that existed only on paper. Peter was like a detective when it came to financial discrepancies, explains David Morrison, a forensic accountant who later analyzed Peter's work. He'd follow every penny until he understood exactly where it went and why. Most accountants looked for compliance. Peter looked for truth. The truth Peter uncovered was staggering. Over 3 years, someone had siphoned nearly £3.2 million from client accounts through a sophisticated web of fraudulent transactions. The scheme was brilliant in its complexity. Small amounts moved through multiple shell companies, disguised as legitimate fees and investment management charges. But Peter's trained eye saw the pattern. Every fraudulent transaction had one thing in common. They were all authorized by Kai Tanaka. For 2 weeks, Peter worked in secret, building an airtight case. He documented every transaction, traced every offshore account, identified every shell company. His evidence was methodical, comprehensive, and damning. By October 23rd, Peter had compiled over 200 pages of evidence proving that Kai Tanaka was running one of the most sophisticated financial fraud schemes in London history. He scheduled a meeting with Margaret Sterling for October 25th to present his findings. He never made it to that meeting. October 24th, 2023. Peter Davies followed his usual routine, unaware he was living the final day of his life. His morning commute took him through the rain-soaked streets of London, past the bustling cafes where office workers grabbed their morning coffee, past the newsstand where he bought his daily Financial Times. At Sterling and Finch, Peter spent the morning putting finishing touches on his report. His secretary, Maria Santos, later told police that Peter seemed unusually focused that day. He was very particular about his filing. Maria remembers. He made copies of everything, which wasn't like him. Usually, he trusted the digital systems completely. But that day, he wanted physical backups of everything. Those physical copies would later prove crucial to the investigation. At lunch, Peter did something else unusual. He visited his bank and placed copies of his evidence in a safety deposit box. The bank's security footage shows Peter arriving at 1:15 p.m., carrying a large manila envelope. He spent 20 minutes in the vault area before leaving. Peter was naturally cautious, explains criminal psychologist Dr. Sarah Chun. But this level of precaution suggests he was genuinely afraid. He knew he was about to accuse a colleague of massive fraud. He was protecting himself. But Peter's precautions wouldn't be enough. That afternoon, Kai Tanaka made his move. Office phone records show he called Peter's extension at 4:47 p.m. The conversation lasted 3 minutes and 27 seconds. Peter seemed agitated after that call, Maria recalls. He kept checking his phone, looking toward Kai's office. I asked if everything was okay, and he just said he had to take care of something important. At 5:30 p.m., Peter gathered his things to leave. But instead of heading home to Hampstead, Security cameras show him walking toward the parking garage where Kai Tanaka's BMW was parked. It would be the last time anyone saw Peter Davies alive. But what happened next remained a mystery that would consume Detective Inspector Lena Hansen for months. Because Kai Tanaka had planned the perfect murder, one that looked exactly like a voluntary disappearance. Eleanor Davies' world shattered at 7:15 p.m. on Sunday, October 29, 2023. For the first time in 13 years, her son didn't call. I knew something was wrong immediately. Eleanor says, tears still fresh even now. Peter was never late. Never. I called his mobile straight away, but it went to voicemail. I called again at 8 p.m., then 9 p.m. By 10 p.m., I was beside myself with worry. Eleanor's frantic calls to Peter's office went unanswered. It was Sunday evening, after all. She spent a sleepless night calling every London hospital, checking accident reports, even contacting the British Transport Police in case Peter had been in a tube accident. Monday morning brought no relief. Sterling and Finch confirmed Peter hadn't shown up for work. His flat manager agreed to do a welfare check, finding Peter's apartment undisturbed but empty. His bed hadn't been slept in over the weekend. Tuesday morning, October 31st, Eleanor Davies filed a missing person report with the Metropolitan Police. The case landed on the desk of Detective Inspector Lena Hansen, a 15-year veteran known for her methodical approach to seemingly impossible cases. When I first read the file, everything about Peter Davies' disappearance felt wrong, D.I. Hansen recalls. Here was a man whose entire life was built on routine and predictability. He doesn't just vanish. Something happened to him. Hansen's initial investigation revealed troubling facts. Peter's mobile phone had been switched off since Friday evening. His bank accounts showed no activity over the weekend. His Oyster card hadn't been used. Most telling of all, his worn leather briefcase, which colleagues said he carried everywhere, was missing. The briefcase was key, Hansen explains. If Peter had planned to disappear, he would have packed clothes, taken cash, made some kind of preparation. But if someone else was involved, they would have taken the briefcase to see what evidence it contained. The initial missing person investigation quickly escalated when Hansen discovered what Peter had been working on in the weeks before his disappearance. Margaret Sterling's revelation about Peter's fraud investigation changed everything. This wasn't a voluntary disappearance or a simple kidnapping. This was a man who had stumbled onto something worth killing for, and the prime suspect had been sitting just 20 feet away from Peter's desk for the past 3 years. D.I. Hansen's first interview with Kai Tanaka took place on November 2nd, 2023, in a sterile conference room at Sterling and Finch. Kai arrived precisely on time, immaculately dressed in a charcoal gray Tom Ford suit, his demeanor one of concerned professionalism. I was devastated to hear about Peter's disappearance, Kai told Hansen, his voice steady and controlled. He was a valued colleague and a dedicated professional. I can't imagine what could have happened to him. But D.I. Hansen was trained to look beyond words. She noticed how Kai's hands remained perfectly still throughout the interview, unusual for someone discussing a missing colleague. She observed how his answers seemed almost rehearsed, as if he'd been preparing for these questions. Most importantly, she caught the micro-expression that flickered across Kai's face when she mentioned Peter's fraud investigation. For just a split second, maybe a tenth of a second, Kai's composure cracked, Hansen remembers. His left eye twitched, and his jaw tightened. It was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him. Kai's alibi for Friday evening, October 24th, was comprehensive and well-documented. Dinner with clients at Nobu Berkeley Street from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m., confirmed by reservation records and credit card statements. Security footage showed him entering and leaving the restaurant at the appropriate times. But alibis can be manufactured, especially by someone with Kai's resources and connections. The breakthrough came when D.I. Hansen examined the parking garage security footage more carefully. The cameras showed Peter walking toward Kai's BMW at 5:43 p.m. on October 24th. But they also showed something else. Kai's car leaving the garage at 6:17 p.m. with two people visible in the front seats. The quality wasn't perfect, but we could clearly see a passenger, Hansen explains. Someone wearing Peter's distinctive navy coat. The next day, Kai's BMW was professionally valeted at an expensive car detailing service in South London. The service record showed it received a premium deep clean, unusual for a car that appeared spotless. But it was Peter's phone records that provided the most damning evidence. Cell tower data showed Peter's phone traveling from the Stirling and Finch office toward North London on the evening of October 24th, then stopping in an area near the Regent's Canal. At 8:47 p.m., the phone was switched off permanently. Kai's phone showed an identical travel pattern. The circumstantial evidence was mounting, but D.I. Hansen needed more. She needed to understand why Kai would risk everything to eliminate Peter Davies. The answer lay in those financial records Peter had been so carefully documented. Forensic accountant David Morrison spent 3 weeks analyzing Peter Davies' evidence files, working with the copies Peter had hidden in his safety deposit box. What he found was a masterpiece of financial deception. Kai Tanaka had created one of the most sophisticated fraud schemes I'd ever seen, Morrison explains. He'd been skimming money from client accounts for over 3 years, but doing it so cleverly that it looked completely legitimate. The scheme worked like this. Kai would identify wealthy clients who rarely scrutinized their monthly statements in detail. He'd then create fake investment management fees, authorized by shell companies he controlled through offshore accounts. The amounts were small enough to avoid immediate detection, never more than 0.5% of the account value at any time. But those small percentages added up. Over 3 years, Kai had stolen £3.2 million. The money was laundered through a complex network of companies registered in the Cayman Islands, eventually ending up in Swiss bank accounts under Kai's control. He used the funds to finance his lifestyle, the expensive suits, the luxury car, the exclusive apartment in Canary Wharf. What made it so dangerous for Peter was that he discovered the pattern. Morrison continues. Peter's analysis was so thorough that it would have been impossible for Kai to deny or explain away. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This was deliberate, systematic theft. But there was more. D.I. Hansen's investigation revealed that Kai had been planning to leave Stirling and Finch within months, taking several major clients with him to start his own firm. Peter's evidence would have destroyed those plans and sent Kai to prison for fraud. The motive was clear. Kai Tanaka had over £3 million reasons to ensure Peter Davies never shared his discoveries. Phone records from October 24th revealed the final piece of the puzzle. Kai's call to Peter that afternoon wasn't about work. It was a carefully crafted lie designed to lure Peter to an isolated location. "I need to discuss the Meridian files with you urgently," Kai had told Peter, according to office voicemail recordings. "Can you meet me at the usual spot? There's something you need to see before you talk to Margaret." The usual spot was a reference to the towpath along Regent's Canal, where Stirling and Finch employees sometimes met informally to discuss sensitive matters away from the office. It was quiet, isolated, and perfect for murder. Peter, trusting and professional to the end, agreed to the meeting. But D.I. Hansen still faced a crucial problem. Nobody meant no murder charge. Under English law, she needed physical evidence that Peter Davies was dead, not just missing. The search for Peter's remains would test every resource of the Metropolitan Police and push the investigation to its limits. December 2023. The Thames estuary, where London's great river meets the North Sea, is a graveyard of secrets. For centuries, the tidal waters have claimed bodies, evidence, and truth, carrying them to the depths where the current runs deep and cold. D.I. Hansen's search for Peter Davies focused on a 30-mile stretch of waterway from central London to the Thames mouth. Mobile phone data had tracked both Peter and Kai's devices to the Regent's Canal on October 24th, but the trail went cold near the canal's junction with the Thames. Water disposal is the classic method for body disposal in London, explains retired Detective Chief Inspector Michael Barnes, who consulted on the case. The Thames system is vast, with countless places where evidence can disappear forever. But water also preserves things, sometimes for longer than killers expect. The Metropolitan Police Marine Unit spent weeks searching the water system, using sonar equipment and underwater cameras to scan the riverbed. They found shopping trolleys, rusted bicycles, and decades of urban detritus, but no trace of Peter Davies. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: environmental monitoring data from the Thames Estuary Management Center. On October 25th, automated sensors near Tilbury had detected an anomaly in water flow patterns, something large entering the water approximately 12 hours after Peter's disappearance. The location was remote, accessible by car via the abandoned Tilbury Riverside Industrial Estate. Historical maps showed it was once used for chemical waste disposal, making it both isolated and symbolically appropriate for disposing of evidence. On December 15, 2023, marine specialists found Peter Davies. His body, weighted down with industrial chains and partially preserved by the cold salt water, was discovered in 18 feet of water near the old Tilbury Chemical Works pier. The pathologist's examination revealed blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being struck by a heavy object. But Peter Davies had one final surprise for his killer. Hidden in a waterproof document wallet inside his coat pocket was a USB drive containing copies of all his evidence against Kai Tanaka. Even in death, the methodical accountant had ensured the truth would survive. December 18, 2023, 6:47 a.m. Kai Tanaka was arrested at his Canary Wharf apartment as he prepared for his morning workout. The timing was deliberate. D.I. Hansen wanted to catch him off guard before he could implement whatever contingency plans a man like Kai undoubtedly possessed. He was remarkably calm, Hansen recalls. Most people, even innocent people, show some emotional response when arrested for murder. Kai just asked if he could finish his coffee. The evidence against Kai was overwhelming. The USB drive from Peter's body contained 200 pages of financial evidence proving systematic fraud. Phone records placed both men at the scene. CCTV footage showed them leaving the office together. Forensic analysis of Kai's car revealed traces of Peter's DNA despite the professional cleaning. But Kai Tanaka wasn't done fighting. His defense, led by one of London's most expensive QCs, argued that the evidence was circumstantial. Yes, Kai had met with Peter on October 24th. Yes, there were financial irregularities in his accounts. But correlation wasn't causation, and the prosecution couldn't prove beyond reasonable doubt that Kai had killed Peter Davies. The defense painted Kai as a successful businessman who had made some questionable financial decisions but wasn't a murderer. They suggested Peter had discovered the irregularities and confronted Kai, who had panicked and convinced Peter to meet him to discuss a resolution. Something had gone wrong during that meeting. Perhaps an accident, perhaps self-defense when Peter threatened to go to the police. But D.I. Hansen had one more piece of evidence that would destroy Kai's defense. The GPS tracking data from Kai's BMW showed multiple trips to the Tilbury area in the weeks following Peter's death. Cell tower records placed Kai's phone near the disposal site on at least 4 separate occasions, suggesting he had returned repeatedly to check on the body's location. That pattern of behavior showed consciousness of guilt, explains Crown Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell. An innocent person doesn't make multiple trips to where a body is hidden. Only the killer would know exactly where to look. The trial of Kai Tanaka began on March 4th, 2024, at the Old Bailey. Court 1, the same room where some of Britain's most notorious criminals had faced justice, was packed with journalists, financial industry observers, and Peter Davies' family and friends. Eleanor Davies, now 75 and visibly frail, attended every day of the 6-week trial. She sat in the front row of the public gallery, clutching a photograph of her son and staring directly at the man accused of murdering him. "I needed to look at him," Eleanor explains. I needed to see the person who took my boy away. I kept thinking Peter would have wanted me to be strong, to see justice done. The prosecution's case was methodical, building piece by piece, just as Peter Davies would have done. They presented the financial evidence, the phone records, the CCTV footage, and the forensic analysis. They showed the jury exactly how Kai had lured Peter to his death and disposed of the evidence. But it was the emotional testimony that proved most powerful. Maria Santos, Peter's secretary, broke down as she described Peter's excitement about his fraud investigation. He said he was going to make sure the clients got their money back. He was so proud that he could help them. He never thought about the danger. Margaret Sterling testified about Peter's integrity and dedication. In 30 years of practice, I never met anyone more honest than Peter Davies. If he said there was fraud, there was fraud. If he said he had evidence, that evidence was unshakable. The defense fought hard, arguing that Kai was a scapegoat for systemic problems in the financial industry. They portrayed him as ambitious but not evil, greedy but not murderous. They suggested that Peter's death had been accidental, the result of a confrontation that had gone wrong. But under cross-examination, Kai's composed facade finally cracked. When asked about the multiple trips to Tilbury after Peter's death, Kai initially denied ever visiting the area. When confronted with GPS evidence proving he was lying, his careful composure shattered. "I was checking," he shouted, rising from his seat. "I had to make sure. I had to." He stopped himself, but it was too late. The jury had heard a confession. On April 18, 2024, after deliberating for just 4 hours, the jury found Kai Tanaka guilty of murder and fraud. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. The conviction of Kai Tanaka sent shockwaves through London's financial district. Sterling and Finch Associates, once one of the city's most respected firms, filed for bankruptcy within 6 months as clients fled and regulatory investigations uncovered additional irregularities. The stolen £3.2 million was recovered from Kai's Swiss accounts and returned to the defrauded clients. But the human cost couldn't be calculated in numbers. Eleanor Davies used part of the Victim Compensation Fund to establish the Peter Davies Foundation, providing scholarships for young people from working-class backgrounds to study accounting and finance. Peter always said that numbers tell the truth, Eleanor explains. He believed that honest accountants were guardians of that truth. "I want other young people to carry on that work." D.I. Lena Hansen was promoted to Detective Chief Inspector in recognition of her work on the case. But she says the investigation changed her understanding of white-collar crime. "We often think of financial fraud as victimless crime, just numbers on a spreadsheet," Hansen reflects. But Peter Davies shows us that behind every fraud investigation is a human being willing to stand up for what's right. And sometimes, that courage costs them everything. The case also led to significant changes in how financial firms monitor internal fraud. The Peter Davies Protocol now requires independent oversight of all major account audits and mandatory rotation of account managers to prevent long-term fraud schemes. But perhaps the most profound impact was on how London's financial community views the quiet accountants in their midst. Peter Davies proved that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they carry briefcases and spend their days making sure the numbers add up correctly. Today, if you visit Peter Davies' grave in Manchester's Southern Cemetery, you'll find fresh flowers every Sunday. Eleanor Davies, now 75, still makes the weekly pilgrimage to talk to her son about her week, just as they used to do over the phone. The headstone bears a simple inscription: Peter Michael Davies, 1988 to 2023. He made the numbers count. In London, the building that housed Sterling and Finch Associates has been converted to luxury flats. There's no plaque marking the spot where one honest man's investigation uncovered millions in fraud and cost him his life. But in the basement archives of the Metropolitan Police, Peter Davies' evidence files remain a masterclass in forensic accounting. Detective trainees study his meticulous documentation, learning how attention to detail can solve cases and save lives. Kai Tanaka sits in Belmarsh Prison, serving his life sentence. He's applied for parole 3 times and been denied each time. The parole board noted his continued lack of remorse and his refusal to accept responsibility for Peter's murder. The financial world has moved on, as it always does. New scandals, new frauds, new investigations. But those who knew Peter Davies remember a simple truth. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can be is right. And sometimes, being right means someone will kill you to keep you quiet. But truth, like numbers, has a way of surfacing eventually. Peter Davies proved that even in death, an honest accountant can balance the books and ensure justice is served. In the end, the numbers didn't lie. They rarely do. July 14th, 2023. Bamako, Mali. The scorching afternoon sun beats down on West Africa's bustling capital as university student Alamata Sidibe steps out of the library, her arms full of literature textbooks. She's 22, brilliant, and on the verge of completing her degree. She waves goodbye to the security guard, checks her phone for messages from friends, and walks into the crowded streets of Bamako. Her mother expects her home by evening. Her friends are waiting at their usual cafe downtown. Alamata Sidibe is never seen again. This isn't just another missing person case. This is the story of how one young woman's disappearance exposed a criminal network operating in the heart of West Africa. A network that had been operating for years, preying on young women, their crimes hidden by corruption and silence. Because when investigators finally unraveled the truth behind Alamata's vanishing, they discovered something far more sinister than a simple kidnapping. They uncovered a trafficking operation that reached from the dusty streets of Bamako to the wealthy neighborhoods of Europe, with victims across multiple countries. And at the center of it all was a trusted community figure whose respectable facade concealed one of Mali's most wanted criminals. To understand what happened to Alamata Sidibe, you need to understand the world she lived in. Bamako, Mali's capital, is a city of contrasts. Ancient traditions clash with modern ambitions. Poverty exists alongside pockets of extreme wealth. And for young women trying to build their futures, dangers lurk beneath the surface of everyday life. Alamata was born into a middle-class family in 2001. Her mother, Dr. Aminata Traoré, was a respected academic at the University of Bamako. Her father had died when she was young, leaving Dr. Traoré to raise Alamata alone while building her career as one of Mali's few female professors. Alamata was everything I hoped for in a daughter, Dr. Traoré remembers, her voice still heavy with grief. Intelligent, responsible, kind to everyone she met. She wanted to become a teacher like me, to help other young women in Mali access education. Alamata excelled at her studies, focusing on French literature with plans to pursue a master's degree in Paris. She was fluent in French, Bambara, and English, skills that made her valuable in Mali's competitive job market. But those same skills would also make her a target. In 2023, Alamata was in her final year at the University of Bamako. She lived at home with her mother in a modest house near the city center, commuting daily to campus on public transport. Friends described her as studious but social, always ready to help classmates with their work. She had such a bright future ahead of her, says Fatou Diallo, Alamata's best friend. We used to talk about traveling together, maybe studying in Europe. She was accepted to several graduate programs in France. Everything was going perfectly. But in Bamako, as in many West African cities, young women face unique dangers. Human trafficking networks operate with impunity, targeting educated women who can be sold into forced labor or worse in North Africa and Europe. Local authorities often lack the resources or the will to investigate disappearances thoroughly. Alamata Sidibe was about to become another statistic, but her case would be different. Because her disappearance would trigger an investigation that would expose crimes spanning 3 countries and bring down one of Mali's most sophisticated criminal operations. July 14, 2023 began like any other Thursday for Alamata Sidibe. She woke at 6 a.m., shared breakfast with her mother, and caught the 7:30 bus to campus. Dr. Traore was heading to an academic conference in Kolokoro and wouldn't return until evening. "Have a good day at the library," Dr. Traore told her daughter as they parted ways that morning. "Don't stay too late. Remember your meeting Fatu and the others tonight." Those would be the last words she ever spoke to her daughter. At the University of Bamako, Alamatu followed her usual routine. She attended 2 morning lectures, grabbed lunch with classmates, and spent the afternoon in the library working on her thesis about women's voices in Francophone African literature. The library security cameras captured her arriving at 2:15 p.m., settling into her favorite study corral near the literature section. She seemed relaxed, occasionally checking her phone and taking notes. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. At 5:30 p.m., those same cameras captured Alamata packing her books and preparing to leave. She waved to the librarian, Miss Koulibaly, who had become friendly with the regular student. She seemed happy, Miss Koulibaly later told police. She said something about meeting friends and having a nice evening. Very normal, very cheerful. Alamata walked out of the library into the bustling Bamako afternoon. The temperature was over 40 degrees Celsius, typical for July and Mali's dry season. Street vendors called out their wares, taxis honked through traffic, and students streamed across campus heading home. Security footage from the campus gates shows Alamata leaving the university at 5:47 p.m. She's walking alone, carrying her usual canvas bag filled with books. She appears to be texting someone on her phone. This is where the trail begins to grow cold. But it's also where investigators would later discover the first crucial clue. Phone records show that at 5:52 p.m., just 5 minutes after leaving campus, Alamatu received a call from an unknown number. The call lasted 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Cell tower data places both phones near the university during this conversation. At 6:15 p.m., Alamatu was supposed to meet her friends at Café Gem, a popular student hangout downtown. She never arrived. Her friends waited until 7 p.m. before calling her phone. It went straight to voicemail. By 8 p.m., they were calling Dr. Traore, who was still at her conference 2 hours away. By 9 p.m., when Dr. Traore returned to Bamako and found no trace of her daughter, she knew something was terribly wrong. But what happened in those crucial hours between 5:47 p.m. and 6:15 p.m. would remain a mystery for months, until a witness emerged who had seen something that would crack the case wide open. July 15, 2023. Dr. Aminata Traore arrived at the Bamako police headquarters at dawn, her eyes red from crying, her hands shaking as she filled out the missing person report. The case was assigned to Inspector Karim Diallo, a 15-year veteran of the Mali National Police. At 38, Diallo had seen every kind of crime Bamako could offer, but missing student cases always hit him hardest. When I met Dr. Traore that morning, I could see the terror in her eyes, Inspector Diallo recalls. As a father myself, I understood her fear, but I also knew the statistics. In Mali, when young women disappear, they're rarely found alive. Diallo immediately launched a comprehensive search. Officers retraced Alamata's steps from the university library to the spot where she was last seen. They interviewed friends, professors, and campus security guards. They checked hospitals, morgues, and detention centers across Bamako. The initial investigation revealed troubling gaps. Despite Bamako's busy streets, no one remembered seeing Alamatu after she left the campus gates. The mysterious phone call at 5:52 p.m. came from a prepaid phone that had been purchased with cash and discarded immediately after use. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air, Diallo says. But people don't just disappear. Someone saw something. Someone knew what happened. Dr. Traore threw herself into the search with desperate energy. She printed thousands of missing person flyers, organized volunteer search parties, and contacted every media outlet in Mali. Alamata's face appeared on television screens and newspaper front pages across the country. The case captured national attention. Here was a brilliant young woman from a respected family, simply trying to build her future through education. If someone like Alamata could vanish without a trace, no one was safe. But as days stretched into weeks, leads dried up. The official investigation stalled. Inspector Diallo was reassigned to other cases. The media moved on to other stories. Dr. Traore refused to give up. She hired private investigators, consulted traditional healers, and followed every rumor and whisper that reached her ears. Her academic career suffered as she devoted every waking moment to finding her daughter. I knew Alamata was out there somewhere, Dr. Traore says. I could feel it in my heart. I just had to find the right person, the right clue, the right door to open. That door would come from the most unlikely source, a small-time informant who operated in Bamako's criminal underworld, trading information for survival. 3 months after Alamata's disappearance, Inspector Diallo received an unexpected visitor. Musa Keita was not the kind of man who usually walked into police stations voluntarily. At 61, he was a career petty criminal, pickpocket, drug dealer, information broker, who survived by staying invisible. But Musa had information about Alamata Sidibe, and he was scared enough to risk talking to the police. I don't usually help cops, Musa told Inspector Diallo during their first meeting in October 2023. But this disappearance, it's bad, really bad, and I think I know who's behind it. Mouse's story began on the afternoon of July 14th. He had been conducting his usual business near the university, selling marijuana to students and keeping an eye out for potential theft opportunities, when he noticed something unusual. A black Mercedes sedan with tinted windows had been parked near the campus gates since early morning. The car was too expensive for the neighborhood, and its occupants were too well dressed to be students or faculty. I watch people for a living, Musa explained. It's how I stay alive. And these guys in the Mercedes, they were watching too. Watching the students, especially the young women. Around 6 p.m. on July 14th, Musa saw a young woman matching Alamata's description walking toward the black Mercedes. She appeared to be talking on her phone and didn't seem distressed. But Musa noticed something that made him uneasy. The girl, she walked right up to the car like she knew the people inside, Musa recalled. But when she got close, 2 men got out. Big guys. She started backing away, but they grabbed her quick, pushed her into the back seat. Musa had seen kidnappings before, but this one was different. Professional, organized. The kind of operation that required planning, resources, and connections. These weren't street criminals, he told Inspector Diallo. These guys had money, had organization, and I recognized one of them. The man Musa recognized would shatter everyone's understanding of the case. Because he wasn't a street criminal or a random predator. He was one of Bamako's most respected businessmen, a pillar of the community who ran charities and donated to schools. His name was Ibrahim Kanare, and he had been operating a sophisticated human trafficking network for over 5 years. Ibrahim Kanare was not an obvious suspect. At 45, he was a successful businessman who owned a chain of electronics stores across Mali. He was married with 3 children, active in his mosque, and known for his charitable work with orphanages. But Musa Keita's identification of Konare sent shockwaves through Inspector Diallo's investigation. Because when they started digging into Konare's background, disturbing patterns emerged. On the surface, Konare was the perfect citizen, Inspector Diallo explains. But his business trips to North Africa were frequent and unexplained. His wealth seemed inconsistent with his legitimate income. And most importantly, he had been in contact with several young women who had disappeared over the past 3 years. Police surveillance of Konare began immediately. They tracked his movements, monitored his phone calls, and investigated his financial records. What they discovered was a criminal operation of stunning sophistication. Konare's electronics stores were fronts for money laundering. His charitable work with orphanages gave him access to vulnerable young women with no family connections. His frequent travel to Algeria and Morocco allowed him to transport victims across borders. Phone records revealed that Canare had called Alamada's number at 5:52 p.m. on July 14th, the mysterious call that had lured her away from her planned meeting with friends. He told her there was an emergency involving her mother. A police wiretap later revealed. Said Dr. Traoré had been in an accident and was asking for her at a clinic across town. Any daughter would have gone, but Alamada hadn't gone to a clinic. She had been taken to a warehouse on the outskirts of Bamako, where Canare held victims before transporting them north through the Sahara Desert. The investigation expanded beyond Mali's borders. Interpol was contacted. Police in Algeria and Morocco began searching for connections to Canare's network, and what they found was horrifying. Over 5 years, Canare had trafficked over 30 young women from Mali to North Africa. Some were sold into forced labor in Algerian factories. Others disappeared into the sex trade in Morocco. A few had been transported all the way to Europe, where they worked as domestic slaves in wealthy households. Most had never been seen again. But Alamada Sidibe was different, because Ibrahim Canare had made a crucial mistake that would bring his entire network crashing down. October 28, 2023. Armed police surrounded a compound outside Bamako at dawn. Intelligence suggested that Canare was preparing to transport several victims to Algeria, including Alamata Sidibe. The raid was coordinated with Malian military units and Interpol agents. They knew they would have only one chance. If Canare escaped or his victims were moved before the operation, they might never be found. Inspector Diallo led the team that breached the main warehouse. What they found inside would haunt him for the rest of his career. There were 12 young women in that warehouse, Diallo recalls, all between 18 and 25, all educated, intelligent women who had been targeted because of their potential value in the trafficking market. The women were being held in a converted shipping container with minimal food, no sanitation, and armed guards watching them constantly. They had been told their families would be killed if they tried to escape. Alamada Sidibe was among them. When I saw her, I almost couldn't believe it, Dr. Traoré says, tears streaming down her face even now. She was so thin, so scared. But she was alive. My daughter was alive. Alamada had been held captive for over 3 months. She had witnessed other women being taken away and never returning. She had been beaten when she refused to cooperate. She had been told repeatedly that her mother was dead and that no one was looking for her. But she had never stopped believing she would be rescued. Every day, I prayed that my mother would find me, Alamada says. I knew she would never give up. And I was right. The raid netted more than just the victims. Police found detailed records of Canare's entire operation, bank accounts in multiple countries, contact lists for buyers in North Africa, and transportation routes used to move victims across borders. Ibrahim Canare was arrested at his family home, along with 8 associates. Their network spanned Mali, Algeria, Morocco, and France. They had been operating for over 5 years, generating millions of dollars in illegal profits. But the investigation was far from over, because the rescued victims' testimonies revealed connections to other disappearances across West Africa, suggesting Canare's network was just one part of a much larger criminal organization. The trial of Ibrahim Canare began in January 2024 and lasted 3 months. It was one of the most significant human trafficking cases in Mali's legal history, drawing international media attention and exposing the extent of modern slavery in West Africa. Canare's defense tried to portray him as a legitimate businessman who had been framed by jealous competitors. They claimed the trafficking charges were fabricated and that he was being scapegoated for Mali's broader security problems. But the evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, financial transactions, victim testimonies, and physical evidence from the warehouse painted a clear picture of systematic criminal activity. Canare showed no remorse throughout the trial. recalls prosecutor Amadou Sanogo. He maintained his innocence even when confronted with recordings of him negotiating prices for the women he had kidnapped. Alamata Sidibe was the prosecution's key witness. Despite the trauma she had endured, she testified clearly and bravely about her kidnapping and captivity. "I wanted to make sure he could never do this to anyone else," Alamatu explains. "My testimony wasn't just for me. It was for all the women who didn't survive to tell their stories." On March 15, 2024, Ibrahim Konare was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His 8 associates received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. Their assets were seized and used to compensate victims and fund anti-trafficking programs. But the victory was bittersweet. Of the 30-plus women Konare had trafficked over 5 years, only 12 were found alive. The others remained missing, their fates unknown. Justice for Konare doesn't bring back the women who died, Dr. Traoré says, but it sends a message that these crimes will not be tolerated in Mali. The case led to significant reforms in Mali's approach to human trafficking. New laws increased penalties for traffickers, expanded victim protection services, and improved international cooperation on cross-border crimes. The Ibrahim Konare Foundation for Missing Women was established using seized criminal assets, providing support for families of trafficking victims and funding prevention programs in vulnerable communities. Today, Alamata Sidibe is completing her master's degree in Paris, the dream that was almost stolen from her. The trauma of her captivity has been immense, requiring years of therapy and support from family and friends. Some days are harder than others, Alamatu admits. "I still have nightmares about that warehouse. But I'm determined not to let Ibrahim Konare define my life. He took 3 months from me, but he won't take my future." Dr. Aminata Traoré has become one of Mali's most prominent advocates for trafficking victims. She works with government agencies and international organizations to improve prevention and victim services. Alamata's case showed that these crimes can happen to anyone, Dr. Traoré says. "We need to be vigilant, we need to support each other, and we need to make sure our young people understand the dangers they face." Inspector Karim Diallo was promoted to chief inspector and now heads Mali's anti-trafficking unit. He credits Alamata's case with transforming his understanding of organized crime in West Africa. "Before this investigation, we thought of human trafficking as something that happened in other countries," Diallo explains. But Konare's network showed us that Mali is both a source and a transit point for these crimes. We had to completely change how we approach these cases. The informant Musa Keita received police protection and a small reward for his cooperation. He has since left Bamako and started a new life in a rural community, away from the criminal underworld that nearly cost him his life. "I'm not a hero," Musa says. "I just saw something wrong and decided to speak up. But if my information helped save that girl and stop those bastards, then I did something good with my worthless life." The case continues to resonate across West Africa, where human trafficking remains a critical problem affecting thousands of young people every year. The disappearance of Alamata Sidibe began as a mother's worst nightmare and became a landmark case in Mali's fight against human trafficking. It showed how criminal networks exploit young people's dreams and ambitions, turning education and opportunity into deadly traps. But it also demonstrated the power of persistence, community solidarity, and international cooperation in confronting these crimes. Ibrahim Konare's network is gone, but the conditions that allowed it to flourish remain. Poverty, corruption, and weak border security continue to make West Africa vulnerable to traffickers and other criminal organizations. "We saved Alamatu, but we couldn't save them all," Dr. Traoré reflects. "That's the reality we live with. But every case like this, every trafficking network we destroy, means other families won't have to go through what we went through." Today, Alamata Sidibe is studying for her master's defense in Paris, preparing to become the teacher she always dreamed of being. She plans to return to Mali after graduation, using her education to help other young women avoid the trap that almost destroyed her life. Her story is one of survival, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and daughter. But it's also a reminder that in our interconnected world, the fight against human trafficking requires vigilance, courage, and cooperation across all levels of society. The numbers tell the story. Over 40 million people worldwide are victims of modern slavery. In West Africa alone, hundreds of thousands of young people are trafficked each year. Most cases are never solved. Most victims are never found. Alamata Sidibe was one of the lucky ones. Her voice now speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves, ensuring that their stories are not forgotten and their lives were not lost in vain.